Here now, our panel to discuss. Joe Moreno, I want to start with you on this. As somebody with legal expertise, the Supreme Court has sided, at least in the emergency decisions that they've had over the course of the last year, with the administration on its major priorities more often than not. I think more often than a lot of people expected at this point. What does it tell you that they didn't hear?
Well, I think, first off, I think good on them. I think the Trump administration was really approaching the line here with its use of the National Guard. And I was fully supportive when it was California, because I think they had a very defined mission, a very defined use there. That mission, that rationale for deploying the Guard was slipping, first in Washington, D.C., and then in Illinois. They really didn't have a defined mission. And as a person who served in the military, I can tell you, we have military police officers, and they're very good, but we're not a domestic police force. It's really not what the Army or the National Guard is meant for. So I'm glad the Supreme Court stood up here, because it's one thing to give the commander-in-chief some wide latitude under Article 2, but that latitude is not unlimited. There are laws, and I'm glad the Supreme Court held the administration to it.
You know, Karen, that's a really good point, because I think there's been a lot of Democrats who have been very frustrated with the ability of the administration, the Solicitor General, to bring emergency requests to the Supreme Court and win, or at least win until cert is actually given in the future at some point. What do you make of this?
You know, look, I think it reaffirms that this is a pattern that many have been pointing out over and over again, where this president has certainly overreached in his authority. And finally, we see the Supreme Court, you know, kind of smacking them on the hand again, because we saw this also with Los Angeles. So, but it also, I think, highlights the political challenge, because the courts move slower than politics, obviously. And so while, you know, I mean, think about when we were talking about what was happening in Chicago and the violence that we saw in neighborhoods throughout, not necessarily with the National Guard, but with border patrol agents there, and the frustration that people felt. You know, when you say to folks, there's a legal case that is making its way, that's important for the facts, but it is frustrating for the politics. And so that's a dynamic that certainly Democrats are having to manage, while a number of cases make their way through the courts.
Yeah, and also administration officials very keenly aware of that pace as well, and their ability to front run it in many cases. All right, Finney, spin this news. GDP today came in, just blew out expectations. Definitely much higher than forecast, surged by 4.3% in the third quarter, fastest pace in 2 years. President Trump quick to take credit, as one would expect, posting, quote, "The tariffs are responsible for the great USA economic numbers just announced, and they will only get better. Also, no inflation and great national security. Pray for the Supreme Court." That's about the tariff case at the Supreme Court. I mean, what's the president have to be concerned about with this GDP number?
Well, gee, didn't I just see a story that Jim Beam, if you're a bourbon drinker, is saying they're having to close a factory down because of tariffs and what's happening with Canada? Didn't we just see Tyson Foods had to close a plant down in part because of tariffs, which meant jobs? So sure, it is great to see GDP numbers so high, and I hope that those numbers remain steady. At the same time, as Joe Biden himself learned, if people don't feel it in their everyday lives, it kind of doesn't matter. Because if people still feel like when they go to the grocery store, when they fill up their cars, things are too expensive, and certainly coming off of Christmas, where we see a number of reports that people are running up credit card debt, those bills are going to come due next year. And so it's about Main Street, not just Wall Street.
Yeah, the number of Biden administration officials I had this fight with over 4 years, but also who in the last 4 or 5 months have been like, man, this feels like Groundhog Day watching the Trump administration deal with this. You can count them on more than two hands. Joe, to that point, you know, this is a difficult kind of cross-cutting element of things where the macro numbers might look great if you look at this GDP number. But underneath the hood, people aren't necessarily feeling, at least according to data.
The numbers are in President Trump's favor. The question is, are they still good enough? Inflation is down to about 3%, but the target is 2%, right? Wages that were down about $3,000 per American household under Biden are up $1,000, but there's still $2,000 in the hole, which means that prices are still exceeding wages, right? The president's tariffs are making things like more expensive. Rent, electricity, right? They're still up. heavy immigration policies are causing shortages in the trucking and construction industries. So the question is the administration going to meet the expectations, which were very high, that President Trump met? And will they meet them quickly enough to really impact the midterms next year?
Yeah, no, it's a really great point. The baseline shift over the years has been fascinating to watch, especially post-COVID. Karen, why aren't people as optimistic as the president kind of underneath the hood, kind of to Joe's point, kind of laying out the baseline shift? But also, do you feel like Democrats will be able to actually capitalize on this as we move into a midterm year?
Sure, because we will talk about how we can lower healthcare costs. I mean, it's great to see the president trying to do something, for example, on weight loss drugs and prescription medicines, but that doesn't fundamentally lower costs that are about to go up in just a week and a half, basically. And so throughout the year, the conversation will be who has got a better plan and who's got more credibility on the issue of affordability. I think the challenge for Trump is going to be, it's very hard for him to stay focused. He has been pretty good in not saying it's a hoax, but he likes tariffs and he likes to talk about tariffs. And increasingly, we see in polls, people believe that the tariffs are harming their pocketbook. So that balance, I think, is going to be the key for Democrats to navigate.
Yeah, and to connect all the dots, Supreme Court, tariffs, boy, that's going to be a thing here in short order. Yeah. Today, President Trump accused the New York Times of, quote, endangering national security in a post on social media. He wrote, their radical left unhinged behavior, writing fake articles and opinions in a never-ending way, must be dealt with and stopped. They are the true enemy of the people. The president doesn't refer to a particular article. It should go without saying, obviously not the enemy of the people, but the impact of the attacks, what do you make of them?
I kind of wish he wouldn't do them. I mean, I get President Trump's perception that he is mistreated by the media. Now, whether that's based on something or not, he believes that. He said that for a decade. Lashing out at the media, specifically when it's not focused on one particular thing, it's just these broadside attacks on major journalistic institutions. Look, he's not really gaining any credibility by doing things like that. And if anything, it's got a chilling effect. So he can be aggravated, and if he wants to bring up specific instances where he feels he's been wronged or defamed, go for it. But generalized attacks, I don't know, really makes me, even as a conservative, pretty uncomfortable.
Yeah, you're not alone. I think most conservatives actually feel that way. Let me be a candidate. Karen, last word to you.
Let me just say, every president, Republican or Democrat, feels like the media isn't fair to them. Obviously, Trump has taken it to a new level, but I can cite many stories of presidents, how they're being mistreated by the media, as you know, Phil.
Yes, actually, I've heard personally from several of them about that issue. This is a little bit of a different level, though, to say the least. Appreciate you guys very much. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Well, anyway.